Why Roman soldiers wore sandals to war. When people imagine the soldiers of the ancient Roman Empire, they usually picture shining armor, rectangular shields, and disciplined formations marching across Europe. But there is one detail that surprises many people when they first learn about it. Roman soldiers, the most feared military force of the ancient world, often fought their wars wearing sandals. Not thick boots. Not heavy leather shoes. Sandals. At first glance, that sounds completely impractical. War is brutal. Battlefields are filled with mud, rocks, sharp weapons, and chaos. In modern armies, soldiers wear reinforced boots designed to protect their feet from injury. Even hikers today use heavy boots when walking long distances through rough terrain. So why would the Roman army, known for its discipline and practical engineering, send soldiers into combat wearing something that looks closer to beachwear? The answer reveals something fascinating about how the Roman army worked. It shows how carefully they designed every piece of equipment. And it also reveals that Roman sandals were not the simple footwear we imagine today. These sandals had a name, the Caligae. The Caligae was the standard military sandal worn by Roman legionaries for centuries. At first glance, it looked like a simple leather sandal with straps wrapping around the foot and ankle. But this design was the result of generations of military experience. Roman soldiers did not just fight battles. They marched. A lot. A Roman legion could march between 20 and 30 kilometers in a single day, sometimes even more during forced marches. And they did this while carrying heavy equipment that could weigh more than 30 kilograms. Imagine walking that distance every day while carrying armor, weapons, tools, and supplies. Now imagine doing that across mountains, forests, rivers, and deserts. Footwear was not a small detail for the Roman army. It was one of the most important parts of a soldier's equipment. If a soldier's feet failed, the entire army slowed down. Roman generals understood something very clearly: an army that moves faster usually wins. Speed allowed Roman forces to surprise enemies, reinforce distant provinces, and move troops across huge territories. The empire stretched across 3 continents, and its soldiers needed to travel enormous distances to defend it. So Roman military designers focused on footwear that allowed endurance. And surprisingly, sandals turned out to be better than boots in many ways. Unlike closed boots, Caligae allowed air to circulate around the foot. This prevented excessive sweating during long marches. In hot Mediterranean climates, this was incredibly important. Sweaty feet trapped inside heavy boots can quickly lead to blisters and infections. But Roman sandals allowed the feet to breathe. The open design also helped keep the feet dry. If a soldier marched through a river or mud, water drained quickly from the sandal instead of remaining trapped inside. Anyone who has ever walked in wet shoes knows how uncomfortable that can be. Roman soldiers avoided that problem entirely. But these were not fragile sandals. The soles were thick and reinforced with metal hobnails hammered into the leather. These nails gave the sandals durability and also improved traction on dirt roads and rocky terrain. In fact, the metal studs made a distinctive sound when Roman soldiers marched. Ancient writers sometimes described the clattering noise of thousands of hobnailed sandals striking the ground in unison. It was a sound that many enemies learned to fear. Because when you heard that sound approaching, it meant the Roman legions were coming. And once the Roman legions arrived, battles rarely went well for their opponents. The Caligae were also designed for strength. The leather straps wrapped securely around the foot and ankle, keeping the sandal tightly attached even during intense movement. This mattered in combat. Roman soldiers fought in tight formations, pushing forward with shields and stabbing with short swords. Stability and grip were essential. The hobnails on the sandals helped soldiers maintain footing while fighting on uneven ground. Another surprising advantage of the Caligae was that they could be repaired easily. Roman soldiers often traveled far from supply centers. If equipment broke, they needed to fix it themselves. Sandals were easier to repair than boots because the leather pieces could be replaced or stitched quickly. The Roman army was extremely practical in its design choices. Every piece of equipment had to balance durability, comfort, and practicality. And the Caligae achieved that balance remarkably well. Interestingly, these sandals became so associated with Roman soldiers that they influenced language and even the names of emperors. One of the most famous Roman emperors, known to history as Caligula, got his nickname from these very sandals. As a child, he grew up in military camps with his father, the general Germanicus. The soldiers made him a tiny pair of Caligae and dressed him like a miniature soldier. They affectionately called him Caligula, which means little boot. The nickname stayed with him for the rest of his life. This shows just how iconic these sandals were within Roman military culture. They were not just footwear. They were a symbol of the legionary soldier. But there was another reason the Romans preferred sandals. Roman warfare often took place in warm climates. Much of the empire surrounded the Mediterranean Sea, where summers were extremely hot. Heavy boots would have made marching miserable under those conditions. Sandals allowed heat to escape, helping soldiers stay comfortable during long campaigns. However, the Roman army was not limited to warm regions. They also fought in colder places like Northern Europe and Britain. In these colder climates, soldiers sometimes wore socks with their sandals or switched to closed footwear. Archaeological discoveries have even uncovered preserved Roman socks worn with sandals. This might sound strange to modern people, but it worked surprisingly well. Roman soldiers adapted their equipment to local conditions. That flexibility was one of the reasons their army remained successful for centuries. The Caligae also had another advantage that is often overlooked. Weight. Heavy boots add extra weight to every step during long marches. Over thousands of steps, that extra weight becomes exhausting. Lighter sandals reduced fatigue and allowed soldiers to move more efficiently. It was a small advantage that became significant over long distances. Roman military engineers understood something many people underestimate. Tiny improvements in equipment can have huge effects on an army's performance. Better roads allowed faster movement. Better armor improved survival. Better footwear allowed soldiers to march farther and fight longer. When you combine all these small advantages together, you get an army that performs better than its enemies in nearly every situation. That is exactly what happened with the Roman legions. For centuries, they dominated battlefields across Europe, North Africa, and the Middle East. And throughout much of that time, they did it wearing sandals. But the story of Roman military footwear goes deeper than just practicality. Because the design of the Caligae also reveals something about the daily life of Roman soldiers. These men were not just warriors. They were builders, engineers, laborers, and travelers. Roman soldiers built roads, bridges, and fortifications. They constructed entire military camps every night while on campaign. Their equipment had to support all these activities. Sandals allowed flexibility, mobility, and comfort during the many different tasks soldiers performed each day. But there is another surprising detail about these sandals that most people never hear about. They were also psychological weapons. The rhythmic sound of thousands of hobnailed sandals marching together created an intimidating presence. It reminded enemies that the Roman army was organized, disciplined, and unstoppable. Imagine standing on a hill and hearing the approaching thunder of an entire legion marching toward you. That sound alone could break morale before a battle even began. And that brings us to another fascinating part of the story. Because Roman sandals were not just designed for marching. They were designed for empire. The Roman Empire depended on its ability to move soldiers quickly across enormous distances. Without fast-moving armies, the empire could never have expanded or defended its borders. Every detail of a legionary's equipment supported that goal. Even the sandals on their feet. In the next part of this story, we'll explore something even more surprising. We'll look at how Roman military footwear was manufactured, how soldiers maintained their sandals during long campaigns, and why archaeologists have discovered thousands of these sandals preserved across ancient Roman sites. Because the humble Roman sandal turns out to be one of the most revealing pieces of military equipment in ancient history. And its story is far more interesting than most people realize. The engineering behind Roman military sandals. When people hear that Roman soldiers marched into battle wearing sandals, they often imagine something simple and fragile. The word sandal today usually brings to mind thin summer footwear meant for comfort, not war. But the sandals worn by Roman legionaries were very different. These military sandals were carefully engineered pieces of equipment designed to survive some of the harshest conditions a soldier could face. Every strap, every layer of leather, and every metal nail had a purpose. The Roman army did not leave equipment designed to chance. For centuries, Roman commanders and craftsmen refined military gear through constant experience in campaigns across Europe, North Africa, and the Middle East. Each improvement came from practical lessons learned in real battles and long marches. The result was the Caligae, a sandal that looked simple but was actually one of the most effective military footwear designs of the ancient world. To understand why these sandals worked so well, it helps to look closely at how they were made. A typical pair of Caligae began with a thick leather sole. Unlike modern sandals that often use a single thin layer, Roman military sandals used several layers of tough leather stacked together. These layers were stitched and sometimes glued to create a strong base that could withstand months of heavy marching. But the most distinctive feature of the sole was something that made Roman footwear famous across the ancient world. Metal hobnails. Small iron nails were hammered through the bottom of the sandal, with their heads forming studs on the outside surface of the sole. The sharp ends of the nails were bent and flattened inside the leather so they would not injure the soldier's foot. These hobnails served several purposes. First, they made the sole much more durable. Leather alone would wear down quickly during long marches across stone roads and rough terrain. But the iron studs absorbed much of the friction with the ground, greatly extending the life of the sandal. Second, the hobnails provided traction. Roman soldiers often marched across muddy fields, rocky hillsides, and slippery ground. The metal studs acted like small cleats, helping soldiers maintain grip even in difficult conditions. This was particularly important in combat. Roman infantry fought in tight formations where stability mattered. Soldiers pushed forward with their shields while stabbing with short swords called the gladius. Losing footing in the middle of a formation could disrupt the entire line. The hobnailed sandals helped prevent that. Third, the nails made the sandals easy to repair. When the metal studs eventually wore down, soldiers or military craftsmen could replace them individually without rebuilding the entire sandal. Roman armies often traveled far from major cities, so equipment needed to be repairable in the field. That practicality defined Roman military engineering. But the sole was only one part of the design. The upper portion of the Caligae was made from a single piece of leather cut into multiple straps. These straps wrapped around the foot and ankle, creating a secure fit that held the sandal firmly in place. Unlike modern sandals that might slip or loosen easily, Caligae were tightly laced. The straps allowed soldiers to adjust the fit depending on their foot shape or the thickness of socks they might wear in colder climates. This adjustable design also meant fewer different sizes were required for soldiers. Roman military supply systems were efficient, but standardization still mattered. Equipment that could adapt to different users simplified logistics. Another clever feature of the Caligae was ventilation. The open design allowed air to circulate freely around the foot. During long marches in hot climates, this airflow helped prevent excessive sweating and overheating. In contrast, closed boots could trap heat and moisture, leading to painful blisters. Blisters might seem like a small problem, but for an army marching hundreds of kilometers, they could become a serious issue. A soldier with damaged feet could not march effectively. And if too many soldiers developed foot injuries, an entire army could slow down. Roman commanders understood this risk very well. That is why footwear received so much attention. The Roman army was famous for its ability to move quickly and maintain endurance over long distances. Their footwear played a major role in that success. Another advantage of the Caligae was flexibility. The leather straps allowed the foot to move naturally while walking. Unlike rigid boots, the sandals adapted to the shape and motion of the foot. This reduced fatigue during long marches. Modern research into walking mechanics has shown that lighter, flexible footwear often reduces energy expenditure during extended travel. The Romans discovered this principle through experience rather than scientific study. They simply observed what worked best for soldiers in the field. And over time, the sandal design proved itself again and again. Archaeological discoveries have revealed just how widespread Caligae were throughout the Roman world. Excavations at ancient military sites in Britain, Germany, and other parts of Europe have uncovered thousands of preserved Roman sandals. Some are remarkably well preserved because they were buried in waterlogged soil that protected the leather. These discoveries give historians an incredible look at the details of Roman footwear. Some sandals show heavy wear patterns that reveal how soldiers walked and marched. Others show repairs where straps were replaced or soles reinforced. These small details tell stories of real soldiers who wore them centuries ago. One famous discovery site is the Roman fort at Vindolanda in northern Britain. There, archaeologists found hundreds of Roman shoes and sandals preserved in mud. Among them were many examples of Caligae, along with other types of footwear used by civilians and officers. The sandals show clear evidence of the hobnail patterns used by Roman craftsmen. Interestingly, the patterns were not always identical. Different units or workshops sometimes arranged the nails in slightly different ways. Some patterns may have even served as a kind of identification mark, indicating where the sandals were made. Roman military supply systems were vast and complex. The empire maintained workshops that produced weapons, armor, and equipment for the legions. Skilled craftsmen worked with leather, metal, and wood to create the gear soldiers needed. But soldiers themselves were also expected to maintain their own equipment. Cleaning, repairing, and caring for gear was part of daily life in the Roman army. Sandals were no exception. If a strap broke or a nail came loose, a soldier needed to fix it quickly. Roman camps often had specialists who could assist with repairs, but soldiers were trained to handle basic maintenance themselves. This emphasis on self-sufficiency helped keep the army functioning even in remote regions. And Roman soldiers often operated in extremely remote regions. Campaigns could take them deep into forests, mountains, deserts, or unfamiliar territories where supply lines were stretched thin. Reliable equipment was essential in those situations. The Caligae proved their reliability across centuries of warfare. But the sandals were not perfect for every environment. In colder climates, the open design could become uncomfortable during winter. Roman soldiers stationed in northern Europe sometimes adapted by wearing thick wool socks with their sandals. Archaeological finds have even preserved some of these socks, showing that Roman soldiers were practical when it came to staying warm. In extremely cold conditions, soldiers sometimes switched to closed shoes or boots instead of sandals. The Roman army was flexible and adaptable, which was one of its greatest strengths. Equipment could change depending on the region and climate. But in many parts of the empire, especially around the Mediterranean, the Caligae remained the preferred choice. The design balanced durability, comfort, and practicality in a way that few other ancient footwear designs could match. It allowed soldiers to march long distances, fight effectively, and maintain their gear with minimal resources. And perhaps most importantly, it supported the mobility that made the Roman army so powerful. Because Roman warfare was not just about fighting battles. It was about getting to the battlefield faster than the enemy expected. And the sandals on a soldier's feet played a surprisingly important role in making that possible. We'll explore the incredible marching ability of Roman legions. We'll look at how these soldiers managed to travel enormous distances across the empire, how their training prepared them for these journeys, and why Roman armies could often outmaneuver their enemies. Because when thousands of soldiers wearing hobnailed sandals marched together across Roman roads, they were not just moving. They were carrying an empire forward. The marching power of the Roman legions. The true strength of the Roman army was not just its weapons, its armor, or even its famous discipline. The real power of the Roman legions was their ability to move. While many ancient armies struggled to travel long distances, Roman soldiers could march for weeks or even months while maintaining organization, strength, and readiness for battle. This ability to move quickly across enormous distances was one of the greatest advantages Rome possessed. And surprisingly, the sandals on a soldier's feet played a crucial role in making it possible. A Roman legionary was expected to march constantly. Campaigns rarely involved staying in one place for long. Armies advanced into enemy territory, patrolled borders, constructed forts, and responded to rebellions. Every movement required soldiers to walk long distances while carrying heavy equipment. A typical Roman soldier carried what historians often call Marius mules. The nickname came from the Roman general Gaius Marius, who reformed the army around the end of the 2nd century BCE. One of his reforms required soldiers to carry much of their own gear instead of relying on large supply trains. This meant that each soldier marched with a heavy load. Weapons, armor, shield, cooking equipment, tools, rations, personal belongings, and parts of the marching camp all had to be carried by the soldier himself. The total weight could reach 30 kilograms or even more. Imagine walking 30 kilometers in a single day while carrying that much weight. Now imagine doing it again the next day. And the day after that. This was the normal life of a Roman legionary. Roman armies typically marched between 20 and 30 kilometers per day. During urgent situations, they could perform forced marches that covered even greater distances. Ancient writers described Roman armies arriving suddenly in places where enemies believed they could not possibly appear so quickly. Speed created surprise. Surprise created victory. But marching such distances was extremely demanding on the body, especially on the feet. Every step placed pressure on joints, muscles, and skin. Poor footwear could quickly lead to injuries that slowed the entire army. Roman military leaders understood that an army's marching ability depended heavily on foot health. This is where the design of the Caligae became so important. The open sandal design allowed the foot to expand naturally during long marches. When people walk for many hours, their feet tend to swell slightly. Tight boots can become painful under these conditions. But Roman sandals allowed more freedom of movement. The ventilation also helped prevent excessive moisture. Sweaty feet inside enclosed shoes can soften the skin and increase the likelihood of blisters. The breathable design of the Caligae helped reduce that risk. Blisters might seem minor, but in an army they could become a serious logistical problem. If too many soldiers developed painful feet, the entire legion slowed down. Roman commanders could not afford that. That is why marching was a major part of Roman military training. New recruits did not simply learn how to fight. They learned how to march. Training exercises often involved long marches carrying full equipment. Soldiers practiced maintaining formation while moving across different types of terrain. They marched across hills, forests, fields, and rocky landscapes. This training strengthened their endurance and prepared them for real campaigns. Roman soldiers were expected to keep a steady pace for hours at a time. The sound of thousands of hobnailed sandals striking the ground together created a distinctive rhythm. Ancient sources described the steady clatter of metal studs hitting stone roads as legions advanced. It was a sound that echoed through valleys and across open plains. For Roman soldiers, it was simply the sound of marching. For their enemies, it was often the sound of approaching danger. Roman roads also played an important role in these marches. The empire built one of the most impressive road networks in the ancient world. These roads connected cities, forts, and provinces across vast distances. The roads were carefully engineered with layers of stone and gravel to create strong, durable surfaces. This allowed armies to move quickly and efficiently. When Roman soldiers marched along these roads wearing hobnailed sandals, the metal studs provided excellent traction on the stone surfaces. The combination of Roman roads and Roman footwear created a powerful advantage. Armies could move faster and more reliably than many of their opponents. But not all marching took place on smooth roads. Roman armies often traveled through wild landscapes where roads did not exist. Forests in Germany, mountains in the Alps, deserts in the Middle East, and muddy fields in Britain all challenged Roman soldiers in different ways. The Caligae proved adaptable in many of these environments. The hobnails helped soldiers maintain grip on slippery or uneven ground. The flexible leather allowed natural movement when climbing hills or crossing rough terrain. And when sandals eventually wore out after months of heavy use, they could be repaired or replaced relatively easily. Roman soldiers were also responsible for constructing temporary camps at the end of each marching day. After walking for hours, the army did not simply rest. Instead, soldiers dug defensive trenches, built wooden walls, and organized the camp layout. These camps followed standardized designs that allowed Roman forces to create fortified positions almost anywhere. Even after exhausting marches, soldiers still needed the energy to perform these tasks. Comfortable and practical footwear helped make that possible. Marching was not just about endurance. It was also about discipline. Roman soldiers moved in organized formations even while traveling. Units maintained order and spacing so that the army could quickly form battle lines if attacked during the march. This level of organization required constant training and strict discipline. Every soldier had a role to play, and everyone depended on the strength and reliability of the men beside them. Footwear might seem like a small detail in such a massive military system. But in reality, it was one of the foundations of Roman mobility. A soldier with damaged feet could not keep pace with the legion. A legion that could not march quickly lost one of its greatest strengths. Roman commanders knew that victory often depended on reaching the right place at the right time. Fast movement allowed them to reinforce allies, intercept enemies, or attack before opponents were fully prepared. The Roman army's ability to march long distances with heavy equipment amazed many ancient observers. Other armies often relied heavily on supply wagons and large numbers of support animals. Roman legions, however, relied more on the endurance of their soldiers. This made them more flexible and less dependent on slow-moving supply trains. And every step of those long journeys was taken in the same distinctive footwear. The Caligae, sandals designed not for comfort alone, but for the relentless movement of an army that rarely stopped. For centuries, Roman soldiers marched across continents wearing these sandals. They marched through rain and dust, across mountains and plains, along roads and through wilderness. And wherever they marched, the empire expanded or defended its borders. The sandals on their feet became symbols of Roman military power. Not because they were glamorous or impressive to look at, but because they allowed soldiers to keep moving. And in warfare, the army that moves best often wins. We'll explore the hidden technology behind the Caligae. We'll look deeper into the materials Roman craftsmen used, the different variations of military footwear, and how these designs evolved as the empire grew and faced new challenges. Because behind every Roman sandal lies a story of engineering, adaptation, and the practical genius that helped build one of history's greatest empires. The hidden technology of the Caligae. At first glance, Roman military sandals appear incredibly simple. A few pieces of leather, some straps, and metal nails hammered into the sole. Compared to the complex armor and weapons of the Roman army, the Caligae might seem almost primitive. But appearances can be misleading. Behind this seemingly simple design was a surprising level of craftsmanship and practical engineering. Roman leatherworkers and military suppliers developed techniques that allowed these sandals to survive months of harsh use in some of the toughest environments an army could face. Understanding this hidden technology reveals how carefully the Roman army thought about even the smallest pieces of equipment. The first important element was the leather itself. Roman craftsmen did not use just any leather when making military footwear. The hides used for Caligae usually came from cattle because cowhide provided both thickness and durability. After the hide was removed, It underwent a tanning process that preserved the material and made it resistant to rot. Tanning leather in the ancient world was not an easy job. It involved soaking the hides in mixtures of water, lime, and plant extracts that helped stabilize the fibers. This process could take weeks or even months to complete. Once the leather was properly prepared, craftsmen cut it into the shapes needed for the sandals. The sole often consisted of multiple layers. These layers were stacked together to create a strong base that could absorb the impact of long marches. The layers were then stitched tightly using strong thread made from animal sinew or plant fibers. But stitching alone was not enough. Roman leatherworkers also relied on clever shaping techniques. The leather was softened with water and then molded to fit the natural shape of the foot. As the leather dried, it hardened slightly and held its new form. This meant that each pair of sandals could gradually adapt to the soldier wearing them. Over time, the footwear became more comfortable as it shaped itself to the soldier's feet. Another remarkable feature of Caligae was their pattern of straps. These straps were not randomly placed. Each strap helped distribute pressure evenly across the foot. When a soldier walked, the tension in the straps kept the sandal firmly attached while still allowing flexibility. Too few straps would cause the sandal to slip. Too many straps would restrict movement. Roman craftsmen found a balance that worked extremely well. The straps also wrapped around the ankle, creating additional stability. This design prevented the sandal from shifting during sudden movements in combat. Imagine a Roman soldier advancing with shield raised and sword ready, pushing forward in formation while stepping across uneven ground. The sandals had to remain secure in that situation. The strap design ensured they did. Then there were the famous hobnails. While they might appear simple, the placement of these nails required careful planning. Too many nails could make the sole uncomfortable and heavy. Too few would reduce durability and traction. Roman craftsmen often arranged the nails in patterns that balanced grip with comfort. The nails themselves were usually made from iron. Blacksmiths forged them into small studs with flat heads. These heads formed the outer surface that contacted the ground. Once hammered through the leather sole, the sharp ends were bent over and flattened inside the sandal. This prevented them from injuring the wearer. The result was a reinforced sole that could endure miles of walking on rough terrain. Interestingly, the hobnails also created a unique side effect. They made Roman soldiers very noisy. As thousands of legionaries marched together across stone roads, the metal stud struck the ground with a sharp clattering sound. Ancient writers sometimes described the thunderous rhythm created by entire legions marching in step. It was a sound that carried across long distances. For local villagers or enemy scouts, hearing that noise often meant only one thing: a Roman army was approaching. In a way, the sandals became part of the psychological presence of Roman power. The sound of marching hobnails symbolized discipline, organization, and military strength. Another hidden advantage of the Caligae design was temperature control. The Mediterranean world could be extremely hot during the summer months. Closed boots would trap heat and moisture around the foot, increasing discomfort and fatigue. The open structure of the sandal allowed air to flow freely. This ventilation helped keep soldiers cooler during long marches. At the same time, the thick leather sole protected the foot from sharp stones or rough ground. The combination of protection and ventilation was difficult to achieve with closed footwear. But Roman sandals managed to provide both. Another practical feature was how easily the sandals could be disassembled and repaired. If one strap broke, it could often be replaced without rebuilding the entire sandal. If the sole wore down, additional leather layers could be added. Roman soldiers carried basic tools that allowed them to perform minor repairs while on campaign. In larger military camps, skilled craftsmen were available to handle more complicated repairs. This repairability made the sandals extremely practical for long campaigns far from major supply centers. Roman armies sometimes operated hundreds of kilometers away from the nearest city. In such situations, equipment needed to last as long as possible. And when something broke, it needed to be fixable. Another fascinating detail about Caligae is that they were designed mainly for ordinary soldiers, not officers. Roman officers often wore different types of footwear, including closed shoes or boots that looked more refined. The sandals became closely associated with the common legionary. They symbolized the hard-working infantrymen who carried the burden of Rome's military expansion. These were the men who marched across continents, built roads and forts, and fought in the front lines of countless battles. Their sandals were practical tools rather than symbols of status. Yet over time, they became one of the most recognizable elements of Roman military equipment. Even today, when movies or illustrations depict Roman soldiers, the hobnailed sandals are often included. They represent the everyday reality of life in the Roman army. But perhaps the most impressive aspect of the Caligae was their longevity. The design remained in use for several centuries. During that time, the Roman Empire expanded from a regional power in Italy to a vast empire covering much of Europe, North Africa, and the Middle East. Roman soldiers fought in deserts, forests, mountains, and coastal plains. And through most of those campaigns, the Caligae remained a reliable piece of equipment. The sandals were not flashy or dramatic. They did not attract the same attention as swords or armor. But they were one of the small technologies that helped support the Roman military system. Sometimes the success of an empire depends not only on grand strategies or famous generals. Sometimes it depends on practical solutions to everyday problems. And few problems are more basic for a marching army than protecting the feet of its soldiers. The Roman Caligae solved that problem remarkably well. We will explore the broader world of Roman military logistics. We'll look at how the empire managed to supply thousands of soldiers with equipment, food, and tools across vast distances. Because the sandals on a Roman soldier's feet were only one small piece of a much larger system that kept the legions moving and fighting for centuries. The logistics behind the Roman army. To truly understand why Roman soldiers could march across continents wearing sandals and still remain one of the most effective fighting forces in history, it is necessary to look at something even more important than the footwear itself. Logistics. Many people imagine ancient warfare as a series of dramatic battles between armies, but the reality was very different. Most of a soldier's life was not spent fighting. It was spent traveling, building, training, and maintaining the massive system that allowed the Roman army to function. Behind every Roman legion stood a powerful logistical machine. This machine ensured that soldiers had weapons, armor, food, clothing, and equipment no matter where they traveled. Without this system, the empire could never have maintained control over such vast territories. The Roman army was not just a fighting force. It was also an organized institution that managed supply, production, and transportation on a massive scale. Each legion usually contained around 5,000 soldiers. When you include officers, engineers, support staff, and auxiliary units, the number of people traveling with a legion could be much larger. Feeding and equipping such a force required careful planning. Every soldier carried some of his own supplies, but the army also relied on a network of supply depots and local resources. Roman soldiers typically carried several days of food while marching. Their basic diet often included grain, which they could grind into flour and bake into simple bread. This food was durable and easy to transport. In addition to food, soldiers carried tools such as shovels, axes, and picks. These tools were essential because Roman armies built fortified camps every evening during campaigns. Even after a long march, soldiers still needed the energy to dig trenches and construct wooden defenses around their camp. This daily routine protected the army from surprise attacks during the night. It also demonstrated the discipline that made Roman legions so effective. The sandals worn by soldiers played a small but meaningful role in this routine. After marching long distances, soldiers still needed to move freely while building the camp. The flexible design of the Caligae allowed them to continue working even after exhausting marches. Heavy boots might have slowed them down or caused additional fatigue. Roman logistics also depended on a network of roads that connected the empire. Roman roads were famous for their durability and engineering. Built from layers of stone and gravel, they created stable surfaces that could withstand heavy traffic for centuries. These roads allowed armies to travel quickly between provinces. When soldiers marched along these roads wearing hobnailed sandals, the metal studs provided excellent grip on the stone surfaces. The roads also made it easier to transport supplies using carts and pack animals. Together, the road network and the disciplined marching ability of Roman soldiers allowed the empire to respond quickly to threats. If a rebellion started in a distant province, reinforcements could begin moving almost immediately. Speed was often the key to preventing small problems from becoming large ones. But the Roman army did not rely entirely on supplies transported from far away. One of the most important aspects of Roman logistics was local sourcing. When Roman armies entered a region, they often obtained food and materials from nearby settlements. This practice reduced the need to carry large quantities of supplies over long distances. In some cases, local communities were required to provide resources to support the army. This system allowed Roman legions to remain mobile and flexible. Equipment was another important part of the logistical system. Weapons, armor, and tools were produced in specialized workshops throughout the empire. Skilled craftsmen worked with metal, wood, and leather to create the equipment soldiers needed. These workshops often operated near major military bases or large cities. Roman sandals were produced in these same supply systems. Leatherworkers crafted the Caligae using standardized designs so that soldiers across the empire could receive similar equipment. Standardization was important because it simplified training and maintenance. When soldiers knew how their equipment was built, they could repair it more easily. This was especially important during long campaigns far from major supply centers. If a sandal strap broke or a hobnail came loose, the soldier could often repair it with basic tools. More complex repairs could be handled by craftsmen within the army. Roman military camps frequently included specialists such as blacksmiths, carpenters, and leatherworkers. These craftsmen helped maintain the army's equipment and ensured that soldiers remained ready for battle. The Roman army also placed great emphasis on organization. Each soldier had a designated place within the formation, and each unit had specific responsibilities. This structure extended to equipment as well. Soldiers were responsible for maintaining their own gear. Regular inspections ensured that weapons were sharp, armor was functional, and sandals were in good condition. Discipline was a central part of Roman military culture. Soldiers who neglected their equipment could face punishment because poor preparation could endanger the entire army. This strict attention to detail helped maintain the effectiveness of the legions. The sandals themselves became part of this disciplined routine. After long marches, soldiers cleaned their equipment, checked for damage, and prepared for the next day's journey. Proper care could extend the life of the sandals and prevent problems during future marches. Another interesting aspect of Roman logistics was the use of auxiliary troops. While Roman citizens made up the core of the legions, auxiliary units were recruited from various regions of the empire. These troops often specialized in certain types of combat, such as cavalry or archery. They sometimes used different equipment than the legionaries. However, the disciplined marching style and logistical system of the Roman army influenced these units as well. The entire military structure functioned as a coordinated system designed to maximize efficiency and mobility. This system allowed the Roman Empire to project power across enormous distances. From the deserts of North Africa to the forests of Northern Europe, Roman soldiers could appear with surprising speed. Their ability to march long distances while carrying heavy equipment amazed many ancient observers. And while weapons and armor often receive most of the attention in stories about ancient warfare, the reality is that success often depended on more practical matters. Food supply, road networks, equipment maintenance, and the health of soldiers' feet. The sandals worn by Roman legionaries may seem like a small detail, but they supported the larger logistical system that kept the army moving. Without reliable footwear, long marches would become painful and inefficient. Without long marches, the Roman army would lose one of its greatest advantages. Because Roman warfare was not only about winning battles. It was about arriving at the battlefield first. We will explore what happened when Roman soldiers actually entered combat. We will look at how their equipment, including their sandals, functioned during the intense moments of battle and why the design of the Caligae continued to serve soldiers even in the chaos of war. Sandals in the chaos of battle. When people think about ancient battles, they often imagine dramatic clashes of swords, shields smashing together, and soldiers charging across open fields. It is easy to focus on the weapons and armor that soldiers carried into combat. But battles were not only fought with swords and shields. They were also fought with balance, footing, and the ability to move quickly in the middle of chaos. In that environment, the sandals worn by Roman soldiers played a much more important role than most people realize. Roman infantry did not fight as individuals charging wildly into combat. Their strength came from fighting as a disciplined unit. The famous Roman legion was built around formations where soldiers stood shoulder to shoulder. Each man carried a large rectangular shield and worked together with the soldiers beside him. The shields formed a protective wall. Behind those shields, soldiers used their short stabbing swords to attack enemies who came within reach. This fighting style required stability. If a soldier slipped or lost balance during the push of battle, it could disrupt the formation. When formations broke, soldiers became vulnerable. Maintaining footing was essential. The hobnails on Roman sandals helped solve this problem. Those iron studs created strong traction on many types of ground. Whether the battlefield was dusty, grassy, muddy, or rocky, the studs helped soldiers grip the surface beneath them. The sandals acted almost like modern athletic cleats. They allowed soldiers to push forward with strength while maintaining balance. Roman battle tactics often involved controlled movement rather than chaotic charges. Soldiers advanced together, shields locked, pressing against enemy lines with steady force. This type of combat sometimes turned into a physical pushing match between two formations. In such situations, the ability to plant one's feet firmly on the ground could determine whether a line held or collapsed. The sandals helped Roman soldiers maintain that stability. Another important factor was flexibility. Unlike heavy boots, sandals allowed the foot to move naturally. The leather straps held the sandals securely, but the open design gave the foot freedom to adjust to uneven ground. Battlefields were rarely smooth. Fighting might take place on hillsides, fields full of rocks, or ground churned into mud by thousands of marching soldiers. Flexible footwear allowed Roman soldiers to react quickly to these conditions. They could pivot, step sideways, or shift their weight without feeling restricted. That mobility made it easier to maintain formation even on difficult terrain. The sandals also had advantages during rapid movements. While Roman infantry often fought in tight formations, battles could still involve sudden changes in direction. Soldiers might need to pursue retreating enemies or quickly reposition themselves. Lightweight sandals made these movements easier than heavy boots would have. Over the course of a long battle, this difference could reduce fatigue. Roman soldiers trained constantly to maintain discipline under pressure. Their training included drills that simulated battlefield conditions. They practiced advancing, retreating, and reforming their lines while carrying full equipment. Through these exercises, soldiers became comfortable moving quickly while wearing their gear. The sandals became part of that familiarity. By the time a soldier entered real combat, he had marched thousands of kilometers and trained countless hours wearing the same type of footwear. He trusted that his sandals would hold firmly during the fight. Another interesting detail is that Roman battles often lasted longer than people expect. Movies sometimes portray ancient combat as short bursts of intense action, but in reality battles could continue for hours. During that time, soldiers needed endurance. Heavy footwear could increase fatigue, especially during long engagements. The lighter design of the Caligae helped reduce this burden. This may seem like a small advantage, but over hours of fighting, small advantages add up. Roman soldiers also carried large shields known as scuta. These shields were heavy but provided excellent protection. The shield wall created by the front line of soldiers allowed them to advance steadily while absorbing enemy attacks. To maintain that wall, soldiers had to move carefully and keep their footing secure. The sandals supported this careful movement. But the usefulness of Roman sandals was not limited to fighting alone. Battlefields often required soldiers to move across difficult landscapes before combat even began. Armies might climb hills, cross rivers, or maneuver through forests to reach the battlefield. The Caligae performed well in these situations because the hobnails provided traction while the open design prevented water from becoming trapped inside. If a soldier marched through shallow water, the sandals drained quickly instead of remaining soaked. Wet boots could become heavy and uncomfortable, but sandals avoided this problem. This advantage helped keep soldiers ready for battle even after difficult marches. Of course, sandals did not provide the same protection as heavy boots. A soldier's foot remained somewhat exposed. However, Roman battle tactics focused heavily on shields and formation defense. The large shields protected most of the soldier's body, including the legs and feet when used correctly. The Romans prioritized mobility and endurance over maximum foot protection. In many cases, this trade-off proved successful. Roman armies won countless battles across different regions of the ancient world. Their equipment choices supported their strategy of disciplined formations, long marches, and flexible movement. The sandals were part of that system. They allowed soldiers to move quickly, maintain balance, and fight effectively even in chaotic conditions. And when the battle ended, those same sandals carried the soldiers onward. Because Roman armies rarely stayed in one place for long. After a victory, the army might immediately begin marching again, toward another city, another province, or another battlefield. The sandals that helped soldiers fight would also help them travel the long roads of the empire. We will look at something even more fascinating. We will explore the archaeological discoveries that have revealed real Roman sandals preserved in ancient forts and camps. These discoveries allow historians to examine the exact footwear worn by Roman soldiers and uncover details about their daily lives. Because the story of Roman sandals is not only preserved in ancient writings. It is also preserved in the ground itself, waiting for archaeologists to uncover it centuries later. Archaeological discoveries of Roman footwear. For centuries, much of what people knew about Roman soldiers came from ancient writings, statues, and artwork. Historians could read descriptions of armies and see images carved into stone monuments, but many details of everyday military life remained uncertain. Then archaeology began to reveal something remarkable. Buried beneath ancient forts, camps, and settlements were thousands of objects once used by Roman soldiers. Among these discoveries were items that most people would never expect to survive for nearly 2,000 years. Roman sandals. Leather usually decays quickly over time, especially when exposed to air and sunlight. But in certain environments, such as waterlogged soil or deep mud, leather can survive for centuries. In several former Roman military sites across Europe, archaeologists have discovered preserved footwear that once belonged to real soldiers of the empire. These finds have given historians an extraordinary glimpse into the daily lives of the Roman legions. One of the most famous sites for these discoveries is the Roman fort of Vindolanda. This fort stood near the northern frontier of Roman Britain, close to what would later become Hadrian's Wall. Vindolanda was occupied by Roman troops for several centuries, and the soil around the fort preserved organic materials incredibly well. When archaeologists began excavating the site, they uncovered thousands of objects that rarely survive in other locations. Wooden writing tablets, tools, clothing, and, most surprisingly, shoes and sandals. Among these were many examples of Roman military Caligae. Some sandals were nearly complete, allowing researchers to study their exact construction. The soles still showed the patterns of iron hobnails that once struck Roman roads during long marches. These discoveries confirmed what ancient writers had described centuries earlier. Roman soldiers really did march and fight wearing sturdy hobnailed sandals. But the archaeological finds also revealed new details that historians had never known before. For example, the sandals varied in size far more than many people expected. Some were extremely large, suggesting that certain Roman soldiers had very big feet. Others were surprisingly small, possibly belonging to younger soldiers or auxiliary troops. The diversity of sizes tells us something interesting about the Roman army. It was not made up of identical individuals. Soldiers came from many different regions of the empire, bringing with them different physical characteristics and backgrounds. The Roman army was incredibly diverse. Archaeologists also discovered evidence of repairs. Some sandals had patches of leather stitched onto worn sections. Others showed signs of replacement straps or added nails. These repairs show that soldiers did not simply throw away damaged footwear. Instead, they maintained and fixed their equipment whenever possible. This fits perfectly with what historians know about Roman military discipline. Soldiers were expected to care for their gear and keep it in good condition. Another fascinating discovery was the presence of different nail patterns on the soles. While most Caligae had hobnails, the exact arrangement sometimes varied. Some patterns were simple rows, while others formed more complex shapes. Historians are still studying whether these patterns might have identified specific workshops or military units. If so, the soles of Roman sandals may have served a purpose similar to modern military markings. The discoveries at Vindolanda also included other types of Roman footwear. Not every shoe found there was a military sandal. Some were closed shoes, boots, or children's footwear belonging to families living near the fort. Roman military bases were not only occupied by soldiers. Merchants, craftsmen, and family members often lived nearby, creating small communities around the forts. This meant that Roman footwear reflected a wide range of daily activities, from marching and fighting to everyday civilian life. One especially interesting discovery was evidence that Roman soldiers sometimes wore socks with their sandals. For many modern people, wearing socks with sandals might seem unusual. But for Roman soldiers stationed in colder regions like Britain, it was a practical solution. Wool socks provided warmth during cold weather while still allowing the advantages of the sandal design. Archaeologists have even found preserved fragments of these socks in some Roman sites. This detail reminds us that Roman soldiers were not rigidly bound to tradition. They adapted their equipment when necessary to deal with local conditions. Roman sandals have also been discovered in other parts of the former empire. Excavations in Germany, the Netherlands, and other European regions have uncovered additional examples of Caligae. Each discovery adds new information about how Roman soldiers lived and traveled. Some sandals show extreme wear patterns, with soles worn down after months of marching. Others appear almost new, perhaps lost or discarded early in their use. These objects provide a direct connection to the real people who served in the Roman army. When historians study a Roman sandal, they are not just examining an artifact. They are examining something that once carried a soldier across mountains, roads, and battlefields nearly 2,000 years ago. The sandals may have walked along Roman roads stretching across Europe. They may have crossed rivers, climbed hills, and marched through forests. And somewhere along those journeys, they were eventually lost or discarded, only to be rediscovered centuries later. Archaeology allows us to see the Roman army in a much more human way. Instead of viewing the legions only as powerful military machines, we begin to see the everyday realities of the soldiers themselves. We see the wear on their equipment. We see the repairs they made. We see the small details of their daily lives. And through these discoveries, we gain a deeper appreciation for how practical and effective Roman military design truly was. The Caligae were not just symbols of Roman soldiers. They were tools that helped those soldiers survive long marches, difficult terrain, and brutal battles. And thanks to archaeological discoveries, we can still study those tools today. But the story of Roman sandals does not end with archaeology, because over time, the Roman army itself began to change. New enemies, new climates, and new military strategies slowly transformed the equipment used by Roman soldiers. And eventually, the famous military sandals that had served the legions for centuries began to disappear. We will explore the daily life of a Roman legionary and how footwear fit into the routines, hardships, and discipline that defined the Roman military experience. The daily life of a Roman legionary. When people think about Roman soldiers, they often picture dramatic battles and heroic moments on the battlefield. But the truth is that most Roman soldiers spent far more time living, working, and training than they did actually fighting. Life in the Roman army was structured, demanding, and extremely disciplined. Every day followed routines designed to keep soldiers physically strong, mentally prepared, and ready to march or fight at any moment. Within this routine, even something as simple as footwear played an important role. The day of a Roman legionary usually began early. At sunrise, soldiers would prepare themselves for the day's duties. Depending on the situation, this could include training exercises, construction work, patrols, or marching to a new location. Roman soldiers were not just warriors. They were also builders and laborers. They constructed roads, bridges, and fortifications across the empire. Many of the famous Roman roads that still exist today were originally built by soldiers. This work required strength and endurance. A soldier might spend hours digging trenches, carrying stones, cutting wood, or raising defensive walls. Flexible and durable footwear helped them perform these tasks more comfortably. The sandals they wore allowed their feet to move naturally while still providing protection from rough ground. Training was another major part of daily life. Roman soldiers trained constantly, even during times of peace. They practiced marching in formation, throwing spears, and fighting with swords and shields. Training weapons were often heavier than real ones. This made real combat feel easier by comparison. The purpose of this intense training was simple. Roman commanders wanted their soldiers to perform automatically in battle. Every movement had to be familiar, every command instantly understood. The sandals soldiers wore during training were the same ones they used during real campaigns. By practicing in the same equipment they used in battle, soldiers became completely comfortable with their gear. Their bodies adapted to the weight of their armor and the feel of their sandals against the ground. Another important part of daily life was camp construction. Whenever Roman armies were on the move, they built a fortified camp at the end of each day's march. Even if they expected to stay only one night, soldiers still constructed defensive walls and dug protective trenches. This routine helped protect the army from surprise attacks. It also reinforced discipline and organization. Every soldier had a specific job during the construction process. Some dug trenches, others built wooden palisades, and others organized supplies inside the camp. The work could be exhausting, especially after a long march. Yet soldiers performed these tasks regularly. Their sandals allowed them to continue working even after walking long distances during the day. Inside the camp, soldiers also maintained their equipment. Weapons had to be cleaned and sharpened. Armor needed repairs. Shields had to remain strong and ready for combat. Footwear required attention as well. If a strap on a sandal became loose or damaged, the soldier needed to repair it quickly. The Roman army encouraged soldiers to take responsibility for their own gear. Regular inspections ensured that every piece of equipment remained functional. A soldier with poorly maintained equipment could endanger not only himself but also the entire unit. Discipline in small matters helped maintain strength in larger ones. Meals were another part of the daily routine. Roman soldiers usually prepared their own food in small groups. Their diet often included grain, vegetables, and sometimes meat when available. Grain could be ground into flour and baked into simple bread. Cooking took place within the organized structure of the camp, where each group of soldiers shared responsibilities. Even during these quieter moments, the sandal soldiers wore was still part of their daily life. They walked through the camp, performed duties, stood guard, and carried supplies. Their footwear accompanied them through every aspect of their routine. Roman soldiers also spent time maintaining physical fitness. Marching drills were common, often requiring soldiers to travel long distances carrying full equipment. These exercises prepared them for the demands of real campaigns. The sandals had to withstand constant use. Over time, the leather would soften and shape itself to the soldier's feet. This made the sandals more comfortable during long marches. A well-worn pair of Caligae could become one of the most reliable pieces of equipment a soldier owned. But life in the Roman army was not only about work and training. There were also moments of rest. Soldiers spent time talking with their comrades, writing letters, or participating in games and entertainment within the camp. Some archaeological discoveries have even revealed personal letters written by Roman soldiers describing their daily lives. These letters show that soldiers worried about ordinary things just like people today. They wrote about missing family members, needing supplies, or hoping for warmer clothing during cold weather. These personal glimpses remind us that Roman soldiers were not just anonymous figures in history. They were individuals with lives, concerns, and friendships. Their sandals, worn during long marches and daily routines, were part of that personal experience. Over time, soldiers might wear through several pairs during their years of service. Roman military service could last for decades. During that time, a soldier might march thousands of kilometers across the empire. From the hot plains of the Mediterranean to the cold frontiers of northern Europe, Roman soldiers traveled enormous distances. Their sandals carried them through forests, across rivers, over mountains, and along the famous roads of the empire. Wherever Roman legions went, the distinctive sound of hobnailed sandals followed. The daily life of a Roman soldier was demanding and sometimes exhausting. But the structure and discipline of that life helped create one of the most powerful military forces in ancient history. Every routine, every training exercise, and every piece of equipment contributed to the effectiveness of the army. Even something as simple as sandals became part of that larger system. But the Roman army did not remain unchanged forever. As centuries passed, new enemies and changing conditions forced the military to adapt. Gradually, the equipment of Roman soldiers began to evolve. And eventually, the famous military sandals that had once defined the Roman legionary began to disappear from the battlefield. We will explore why the Roman army eventually stopped using these sandals and how changes in warfare and climate led to the rise of new types of military footwear. Why the Roman military sandal eventually disappeared. For hundreds of years, Roman soldiers marched across the ancient world wearing the famous military sandals known as Caligae. These sandals carried the legions across deserts, mountains, forests, and along the stone roads that connected the empire. They became one of the most recognizable symbols of the Roman infantryman. But like many things in history, even successful designs eventually change. As the centuries passed, the Roman army slowly began to replace the Caligae with different types of footwear. By the later periods of the empire, sandals were no longer the standard equipment for Roman soldiers. The question is why? The Caligae had served the army well for generations. They were practical, durable, and perfectly suited to the warm climates where much of the early Roman Empire existed. So what caused the change? The answer lies in the transformation of the Roman military itself. One of the biggest reasons was geography. During the early expansion of Rome, many campaigns took place around the Mediterranean world. The climates in these regions were generally warm, dry, and suitable for open sandals. But as the empire expanded farther north, Roman soldiers began spending more time in colder environments. The provinces of northern Europe were very different from the sunny landscapes of Italy, Greece, or North Africa. In places like Britain, Germany, and along the Rhine frontier, winters could be extremely cold and wet. Soldiers stationed in these areas faced freezing temperatures, heavy rain, and muddy ground. Under these conditions, open sandals were far less comfortable. Although soldiers sometimes wore wool socks with their sandals, this solution was not always enough. Closed footwear provided better protection against cold weather and moisture. Gradually, Roman soldiers began using more enclosed shoes and boots, which offered greater warmth and protection. Archaeological discoveries show that later Roman military sites contain more examples of closed shoes than the earlier hobnailed sandals. Another reason for the change was the evolving nature of warfare. The Roman army of the early empire relied heavily on disciplined infantry formations. These formations worked well with the mobility and flexibility provided by sandals. But as time passed, the military structure of the empire changed. New enemies emerged along the borders, including heavily armed warriors from various regions of Europe and Asia. These enemies sometimes fought differently than earlier opponents. Roman tactics adapted in response. Over time, the army began to rely more on cavalry and different types of infantry units. Equipment evolved as these tactical changes occurred. Heavier armor and different battlefield conditions made more protective footwear practical. Closed boots offered better defense for the feet during rough combat situations. The structure of the Roman army itself also changed. During the later centuries of the empire, recruitment practices shifted. The army included more soldiers from distant provinces and different cultural backgrounds. These soldiers sometimes brought their own traditions of equipment and clothing. As a result, the standardized appearance of Roman soldiers began to evolve. The Caligae gradually became less common. By the later imperial period, soldiers were more often depicted wearing closed boots rather than open sandals. These boots provided additional protection and warmth in the diverse climates where Roman troops served. Despite this change, the influence of the Caligae remained strong. For centuries, the sandals had been an essential part of the Roman military system. They supported the long marches that allowed Roman armies to move quickly across vast distances. They helped soldiers maintain stability in battle and comfort during exhausting campaigns. They were simple but effective, reflecting the practical mindset that defined Roman military engineering. Even today, historians often view the Caligae as a symbol of the disciplined Roman legionary. The image of a Roman soldier marching along a stone road, shield at his side and hobnailed sandals striking the ground, remains one of the most powerful images of the ancient world. And in many ways, that image represents something deeper than just footwear. It represents the philosophy of the Roman army. Roman military success did not depend only on brilliant generals or powerful weapons. It depended on organization, discipline, and practical solutions to everyday problems. From the design of their roads to the structure of their camps, Roman engineers focused on efficiency and reliability. The sandals worn by soldiers were part of that same philosophy. They were designed not for appearance, but for performance. They allowed soldiers to march farther, work longer, and fight effectively. And those qualities helped the Roman Empire expand across 3 continents. Eventually, the empire changed. New challenges, new enemies, and new environments required different equipment. The Caligae slowly faded from military use. But their legacy remained. Through archaeological discoveries, historical writings, and the study of Roman military life, we can still understand why these sandals were once such an important part of one of history's most powerful armies. They remind us that even the smallest details can influence the course of history. Sometimes the success of an empire depends not only on grand strategies or famous battles. Sometimes it depends on something as simple as the sandals worn by the soldiers who carried that empire forward. The legacy of Roman military sandals. The story of Roman soldiers and their sandals is more than a tale about footwear. It is a story about innovation, discipline, and practical problem-solving, the qualities that allowed the Roman Empire to endure for centuries. From the earliest campaigns in Italy to the farthest reaches of Europe, North Africa, and the Middle East, the Caligae were companions to the men who carried the empire's power. They were more than just shoes. They were tools that supported mobility, endurance, and effectiveness on the march and the battlefield. Roman soldiers relied on these sandals every day, during long marches, grueling construction work, daily training, and intense combat. The design of the Caligae, sturdy leather, flexible straps, and hobnails for traction, was remarkably suited to the life of a soldier constantly on the move. It balanced protection with mobility, comfort with durability, and simplicity with practical engineering. Archaeological discoveries have allowed historians to study these sandals firsthand, providing insights into how soldiers lived, how they marched, and how they fought. Finds at forts like Vindolanda reveal worn soles, repaired straps, and hobnail patterns, each mark telling the story of miles marched and battles endured. These artifacts remind us that history is not just about grand events, but also about the daily lives of the people who shaped it. Over time, as the empire expanded into colder climates and warfare evolved, Roman sandals gradually gave way to enclosed boots and new types of footwear. Yet the principles behind their design, durability, functionality, and adaptability, remained central to military equipment for centuries. The legacy of the Caligae extends beyond history books. They symbolize the ingenuity of the Roman military system, the emphasis on training and discipline, and the importance of even the smallest details in the success of one of the greatest armies in human history. Roman soldiers marching in sandals were more than warriors. They were living embodiments of an empire built on strategy, engineering, and endurance. Every step taken in those sandals represented movement, expansion, and the extraordinary ability of the Roman army to project power across the ancient world. Even today, the image of the Roman legion, hobnailed sandals striking the stone roads, shields locked in formation, disciplined soldiers moving as one, captures the imagination. It reminds us that history is shaped not only by generals and battles but also by the practical, everyday choices that enable human achievement. In the end, the sandals were small, but their impact was immense. They carried Rome forward, one step at a time. And in studying them, we gain a deeper understanding not just of Roman soldiers, but of the ingenuity, resilience, and discipline that allowed an empire to stand the test of time. The Caligae may no longer walk the earth, but their story continues, etched into the stones of Roman roads, the pages of history, and the imagination of anyone who seeks to understand how ordinary objects can leave extraordinary legacies.